Hello everyone. So last lesson we looked at setting up the character controller for our Link character here and just moving left and right and just had the camera moving around. Now I know the camera wasn't doing this last time, so we'll just quickly clear up that. So if we go to our character and go character spring arm, there's just a few settings in here. One is use character pawn rotation. We want to make sure that is checked. You can enable camera lag if you want. It sometimes makes it smoother, but it's not entirely necessary. And the other one is just down here on your actual character movement control, and that is orient rotation to movement. Having that checked means that later on when we start moving our character towards it and everything, it should do it. So that should fix up the y-axis. If not, just come and have a chat with me and we'll figure out why it's not quite doing that. But what I wanted to look at this lesson is how do we get the animations working now so that when our character is moving, they actually walk instead of just ice skating around. So there's two main parts to this, and the first part is going to be when we look here on our character mesh. So I've just got to clear that. Is this animation blueprint. We currently don't have any selected. So the third person character had one, but we've got to create one there. The other part is a thing called a blend space. So I'll actually show the blend space first because it's a bit quicker and easier to set up, and it will explain it how we sort of get them transitioning from an idle to a walk to a jump and all those things. So we're going to right click down here and we're going to go here to animation, and then we're going to go down here to blend space. And it's going to ask us to pick a skeleton, so we're going to go with the walk skeleton, but it may be different depending on what you've named yours. So I'm going to call this BS Link, so we know it's the blend space and then it's attached to Link. And you can see here it's already got that icon there. So it's already got this character here, but we don't have any animations. Now if we have pulled all our FBX animations in and they are all correctly attached to that skeleton, then when we look at our blend space on the right hand side corner here, we should see all of those there. So if you don't, maybe look at re-importing those ones there. But let's just sort of break this whole sort of thing down here and everything. So this here is a graph. It has, because it's a two-dimensional graph other than the 1D option you saw there before, we can go up on the y-axis and across on the x-axis. The bottom part of the graph is 0, top part is 100 and 100. So we can actually go to our axis settings here and change those if we wanted to. So we could change our vertical axis and we could change our horizontal axis. What we're going to look at in this one is just setting up the sort of bottom x-axis here, which is going from idle to walk and run. So horizontal axis then we're going to call move speed. And that'll come in later when we start looking at the animation blueprint, but just for now, just having it named like something like that is going to be useful. So now let's actually start left clicking and dragging our ones in here. So we're going to start with idle because that's what it should be doing when the character's not moving at all. So when the horizontal speed is 0, it's just going to play this animation here. Now I'm going to left click and drag this dot here, and I can actually move it around the graph. So I'm going to actually have our walk animation right here in the middle. So as you can see, it's sort of got this midpoint here where it's not quite idle and it's not quite walking, but then as it moves forward, it then slowly transitions into a walk. And that's how in video games you'll notice a character like in Assassin's Creed and everything will go from just standing, you know, in their idle animation to then just, you know, now they're just running and everything. And it's really sort of smooth transition. So that's how they sort of do that, and that's why blend spaces are important. So I'm just going to actually bring in the run at the very end here as well. And we're just going to have that run cycle there. So it slowly transitions from idle to walk to run based on how fast your character is going. So now if we're going to do things like a jump, I'm going to have a pre-jump up here and then a falling animation up here. So the idea is that when you hold down space, you'll go into this sort of thing. It'll only play once and then he'll be up in the air and just sort of floating. So he'll play that animation for as long as he is in the air, and then when he lands, he'll go back to the idle sort of phase again. So he'll sort of do almost a reverse sort of pre-jump and then back to there. So that's our blend space pretty much all set up. We don't really need to do too much else. I'm just going to call this vertical axis here jump, and then save that. Cool. So we're done with that. So we can't add in here though because that's not an animation blueprint, it's just the blend space. Now here comes a bit of the sort of complicated part. So what we're going to do is we need to first create a animation blueprint, which is easiest to find under animation. animation blueprint there. We need to select our skeleton. So again, we're going with the link skeleton, though yours may be named differently. It's whatever your character skeleton is. And we're going to call this one animation blueprint underscore link. Cool. So let's open it up and let's talk about this, and it may take a bit of sort of understanding and everything, but we will get there in the end. So like all blueprints, you have an event graph here where we can give instructions, and we also have this one here, which is an animation graph, which doesn't really look like a graph. Basically what this is going to be is taking that blend space that we just had in there and then plugging it into this final pose, okay, so that it's always checking to see, okay, is the player pressing W and moving forward? If so, I need to look at that blend space, translate what the player velocity is, and then make it go here into the final pose. Or is the player not doing anything, in which case I need to go check the blend space, see that the player velocity is 0, and then put it into the final animation there. So there's a number of different ways we've got to do that, but first of all, let's talk about, well, how do we actually get the player's velocity? Because, you know, we've got this sort of capsule here that's moving through the world, as we can already see. And, you know, when we're sort of moving around, we can actually measure the velocity and use that as a means of deciding how fast the player's going and therefore what animation they should be playing. So I'll just try and do this. This may or may not work, but we'll see. So let's just go event tick. So you don't need to do this. This is more or less just me showing you how we can get the velocity. Get physics linear velocity, sure. This may or may not work, but we'll see. So basically what I've done here is I've gotten the mesh here, and we've gotten that sort of velocity here. I mean, it would be awesome if we could just have it for the capsule. I think that'll be a little bit better because I have a feeling the mesh won't read it. But in here, it's just going to print that string, and don't know if that'll work. It might work. Let's see if that does. So basically, it's taking that return value of the velocity and putting it into a string and printing it there on the screen. So let's see if this works. It may not. So here you can see X, Y, and Z are 0. But as I move forward, that changes. Okay. So what Unreal is doing there is it's taking that capsule and it's actually getting the velocity out of it depending on which sort of direction it's facing. And that's what we're going to be using to decide what sort of animation our character will be playing. So again, don't need to do that, but knowing this print string thing here, that's actually really quite useful for debugging because you can just see straight away the data that's going on under the hood. So anyway, in our animation blueprint, we need to first have a variable that actually captures that velocity. So we're going to click here on variable and we're going to call it player velocity. And by default, it always comes out as a Boolean. We don't want a Boolean. Boolean is only true or false. We don't want to know, are they moving, are they not moving? We actually want to know what speed they're moving at. So as you could see there before, velocity works on vectors, so that's what we're going to use. So a vector is X, Y, and Z, or RGB, or any sort of 3 numbers like that that are put together to create a single expression. So we have there as velocity, but we can't just plug velocity straight into here because it doesn't know what to do with that. So what we've got to do is figure out, okay, we've got this shell to put velocity in. How are we going to actually get this? So this is the blueprint update animation. This is kind of like that event tick, but it's a lot less programmer or processor intensive and everything. It's found an efficient way of being able to check this all the time so that our player can move smoothly without taking up too much memory. We've also got the pawn owner, so this means your player. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this out and we're going to type in is valid. So what this is checking is it's checking if the player, if this expression is sort of valid, and if it's not valid, then it won't do it, and it will just go back to 0 basically. So we've got our owner here, and we're going to do the same thing we did before, which is get velocity. So it's just going to get that velocity here, and it's just there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull this player velocity out. And just like all variables, our booleans and our floats and everything, we have the option of either getting or setting. We want to actually set this velocity in this sort of expression. So when the game starts, it's going to check the player, and it's going to see what is the velocity, and then it's going to set that velocity to whatever this is. So that's a very simple way of doing this one and everything. We'll have to go back and make this a little bit more complicated when we're debugging it, but right now I just want you to be able to get the idea about what is going on here. Okay, so we're going to go compile, and it's just going to be sitting there. Now, that's cool. We've got the velocity now, so we can get this out and say get player velocity. And there's just one more thing we've got to do. In fact, I'll wait until we get the state machine in there so you can understand why we do that, because I don't think we'll do that here. I think we'll actually do that inside of this. So this is where things get a little bit Inception-like and everything. What we've got to do is create a state machine. A state machine is a bit like an anim tree if you've ever used Unity. Basically, it's just looking at that blend space and then deciding, okay, where does it move from one to the other? So our initial one is going to be quite simple, but as we add in other things like jumping or attacking or everything else like that, the tree will get more advanced. So what I'm going to write down here is new state machine. Okay, just like that. And basically that's going to plug into there. And at the moment, as you can see, it's not doing anything because it doesn't really have anything connected to it. Now, if we double click it, we will now go inside this state machine. So if you want to get back, all you got to do is click anim graph here. If you want to go back in, you just got to double click. It's not a very great system. It confuses a lot of people, so don't be worried if you get a little bit lost in this section. Just go back and watch it again. So basically when the game starts, it's got an entry here. We've got to have it connected to something, and that something is going to be that blend space. So I'm going to go down here to my blend space and drag and drop it in. Now I need to left click and drag on here on this executor line and plug it into here. Okay, so we'll go save. And that's all we need to do for now. Later on, we'll pull out of here to go to, say, falling to see if the character's in the air and if they're falling, so that we can sort of have them play that falling animation so they're not just walking in mid-space. We're going to left-click and drag it out of here to go to the pre-jump animation and then to the falling animation and then back to the walking animation. But just for now, this is going to be just here. So now if we double-click, and this is what I mean about it being, Inception, it sort of goes inside the state machine, and now inside that blueprint space, we now see those two variables that we were talking about before. So just to remind you what those looked like, here on our blend space, we have the vertical line, which is the y-axis, that's jump, and we have the horizontal line. So basically, we need the move speed. As it increases, it will change this. So if the move speed is 0, idle, and if it's 100, he'll run. So we're going to go save here, and what we need to look at now is that animation blueprint. So it's created these tabs up here, which makes it a bit easier to move through. And as you can see, from that blueprint space, we have move speed, which is the x-axis, and jump, which is the y-axis. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this player velocity out of here and say get player velocity, because we're not going to set it, because that's what this event graph is doing. It's getting the player's velocity and turning it into something that we can use as a vector. But the only problem is we can't really just go like that. It won't accept it. This is a vector and this is a float. So how do we change that? Well, we can actually go get vector length. Yep, there it is. And we can just plug that into there. So what that's done is it's taken that whole those three separate digits and converted it into a float that can then be expressed on move. So here, so we're going to go compile, and as you can see here now, because the animation, because the player's velocity is 0, character is just moving still. So let's just go here, and we can see here that we've got player velocity all set to 0. But let's just set this to 100, 100. And 100. Now I don't need to do it to all of them because you could just be running forward, but as you can see, it's transitioned to here. Let's change that to 50. And see that, no. Okay, let's change that to just 1. Yeah. So 10, we're starting to see a walk animation here and everything else like that. Okay, so later on we'll look at how we can have this so that it's only, so I'll switch those back to 0 as their default. Later on, we will look at how we can hold down shift and move them forward, but this video has already gone pretty long, so if you can get to this point, I'll be very happy with that. So anyway, that should be all of this now done. If we go back to our animation graph, it should be going into there just nicely. Our event graph is working. Cool, let's compile. And now, if we go here and press play, it still won't work. So what's happened? Well, we've got to actually now point the blueprint to look at that animation. So when we first started, I pointed out that we had to set the blueprint here. You need to do that. It won't do it by default. So we go here, animation blueprint link. Again, naming conventions are everything. And as you can see, it's already working because the idle animation is playing. So if we go compile and save, Now when we go back to our level here he is, and as soon as I press forward and move, starts running around. Now I won't go into the walk cycle because it goes straight into this run, because as soon as I hold it down, as you would have seen from that velocity before, it sort of really goes straight up and everything. So we've also got a problem here where it sort of walks backwards and everything that we'll solve in the next scene, so that when you press S, he actually turns the character around and walks there. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was... Let's just uncheck that, because I think that is actually... No, it'll be one of those ones anyway. I'll have that checked for the next video. But again, if you can get to this point here where your character is moving and everything, then that's great. Cool, excellent, and I will see you next video.